and welcome back to On the Grid Podcast, Season 3, Episode 38. We keep knocking them out the park, and we are back again reviewing the Brazilian Grand Prix, or sorry, should I say the Sao Paulo Grand Prix? It's not known as the Brazilian Grand Prix, is it? I am Ethan Evans, joined as ever by the creator, Adrian. How are you today?
Quite sad after the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. I won't lie. Yeah. Let's just get into it. Let's just put my misery to the side and let's just talk about another Max Verstappen victory, shall we?
Understandable, given what happened to a certain Ferrari this weekend. So we'll just jump straight in as we do on the sprint races by going through our 1 to 10 driver predictions. So we will kick things off as ever with Max Verstappen for another victory, number 17 this season. So qualified for the sprint in second, finished first, and qualified on pole and finished first. It's a 10 out of 10, isn't it? You know, what more does the guy have to do? It's ridiculous. I will just say, I don't think that the raw qualifying pace is quite as big between Red Bull and the rest of the field as the race pace is. I think the gap isn't too big in terms of that. However, you know, as we said, the race pace is just unbelievable. It's another victory, as we said. He is one behind Sebastian Vettel's all-time total, should say. And he doesn't look like stopping anytime soon. It's scary, the fact that if he has another 3 years of this sort of dominance, he's going to have the most wins in F1 history. He's only about 50 behind Hamilton. The man is frightening. It's frighteningly quick. So yeah, 10 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 from me as well. I mean, what can you say that just describes this man? I go on every single podcast episode and I say the exact same thing about Max Verstappen because the exact same thing happens. He goes on pole and he wins it. I mean, Charles Leclerc had 2 poles previous to this race, but Max Verstappen has gone on to win it. He's gone on to dominate it. And it's another one where in the race, I was hoping that Lando Norris, especially in the opening laps, it was looking very, very close to Max Verstappen. And you're thinking, hold on, wait a minute. Are McLaren and Lando Norris going to pull the plug and absolutely send it on Max Verstappen? That didn't happen. He got close to 1 second within the first 5 laps, and then Max Verstappen continued to stretch that lead out and out and out and out. And went on to win by about, I think it was 8 or 9 seconds. Lando did start cashing him up a little bit, but it wasn't to be enough. But yeah, it's another dominant display. It's another 10 out of 10, and there's not enough adjectives to describe this season so far for this man because it's beyond extraordinary what he's doing in that Red Bull. Like you say, 1 win away from Sebastian Vettel's record already, and he's done the 3-peat. He'll end up probably doing it 4 in a row next season, and you're thinking, is anybody going to stop this man anytime soon? Because like I think most F1 fans didn't like it when Hamilton was dominating, but I think people are starting to get a little bit frustrated with Max Verstappen continuously dominating. It's similar to the Hamilton dominance era, this Verstappen dominance era. So hopefully in 2024 we have a bit more closer action with McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes joining the mix a little bit closer to Red Bull. But that Red Bull is far too superior to all the other teams. So 10 out of 10 for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, we can only hope, can't we? We can only hope. I think what's different though about the Max Verstappen dominance is that nobody else is winning a race. There's 3 races this season that he hasn't won. You compare that to Lewis Hamilton, it felt like there were a number of races where you'd see a Ricciardo or a Verstappen or Vettel, Bottas win a number of races in a season, or Nico Rosberg, even when he was winning those championships. So it felt slightly different, I would say, in that regard. But yeah, like I said, you just got nobody else even challenging for the wins. I know Norris wasn't a million miles away, but he wasn't going to get any luck, but he did have one opportunity. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he got past there, but realistically, Verstappen would have just overtaken him again, and still go on to win. So yeah, it's frightening how good that man is operating at this moment in time. Moving on now to the man you just mentioned, Lando Norris. He qualified for the sprint in first and finished second, qualified for the race in sixth and finished second. Again, 10 out of 10 performance. What more do you want to add? A great pole position in the sprint qualifying. Couldn't hold off Verstappen, though. He did have a brief battle, like we said, but realistically, he wasn't ever going to make that move. And I think once he maybe used a bit too much of his battery trying to fight with him. Finished 8 seconds off Verstappen, which is still relatively close. Got the fastest lap. But what I want to know is, why didn't McLaren take that risk and just keep him on a one stopper? Because he was sort of 11 seconds ahead of him with about 12 laps to go, I think it was. Surely you just say in that moment, look, we got nothing to lose here. Why don't we just go for it? But they didn't. They did pit him for that extra stop, and Norris maybe reduced the gap down a little bit, but it wasn't ever gonna get down to zero. So another Verstappen victory, but 10 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10 performance for Lando Norris. I think most of the drivers within the top three, at least, I'm gonna even put Alonso in there, justified 9 out of 10 plus. But for Lando Norris, I know you're talking about that one stopper, but I don't think he could have held off Max Verstappen. There's a risk there in taking it, but I just think McLaren wants to play it safe. Obviously he got that fastest lap in, so he got that extra point anyway. And I just think they wanted to play it safe, get the points over the line. Obviously after the Mexican Grand Prix, they're a little bit on the back foot with Lando's qualifying and Oscar's little bit of a misfortune in Mexico. And I just think they just wanted to secure the points. I don't think they were too bothered about the victory. I think they were just bothered about getting the valuable points of a championship, which moves Lando into I believe he's fourth. I want to say he's fourth, or it might be fifth, just behind Alonso. But nevertheless, fantastic pole in the sprint, another podium in the sprint, and then a podium in the race. So I don't think you can. I mean, the qualifying could be a little bit more desired from, but I mean, he recovered perfectly in the race, got P2, got the podium, wrapped up a fair bit of points, and got the job done. So it's another 10 out of 10 performance for another fantastic driver in Lando Norris.
The scary part is Norris is 3 points off Alonso in fourth in the championship. Bear in mind, going into Austria, the guy was on 12 points, which is Austria is round 9 of the season, and he was on 12 points at that stage. He's now on 195. So in 11 races, he's got about 186 points, which is remarkable. 7 podiums as well to add into the mix. Yeah, just a ridiculous level that he's driving at the minute. On to third place man, Fernando Alonso. He has qualified for the sprint in 15th and finished 11th, qualified for the race in 4th and finished 3rd. I think Alonso and Aston Martin really prioritised this race, because they were awful in the sprint, both Alonso and Stroll. But then in the in the main race, they really pulled it out of the bag, and they had great race pace, and obviously benefited in qualifying by having that extra run, even in those in bad conditions. So it's a 10 out of 10 again for Fernando Alonso, where the level he's been driving at this season has been remarkable, and it's another great performance back on the podium. What is it? First time since Canada that Alonso's on the podium, which is it's been too long since then. So a great effort from him, 10 out of 10, and he's clinging on for dear life to fourth place at the minute. I don't think he'll get it, but he's really clinging on, isn't he?
Yeah, he's clinging on. Like I say, I would in the previous segment for Lando Norris, I said the top three drivers deserve a nine and above. I'm not going to give the perfect 10 to Fernando Alonso purely on the basis of that sprint. That sprint was shocking. We're talking about overall the sprint shootout, the sprint qualifying, and the race as a whole. I'm going to give him a 9.5 out of 10. The sprint it could have been a little bit better, but it was clear to see that Aston Martin prioritized the main race, which I'm not gonna say it's their fault, and I'm not gonna say it's a bad thing because it's a perfect thing. They got a podium for Fernando Alonso once again. So I'm gonna hold my hands up and say, yes, maybe they were prioritizing the race, but the sprint, if you got points, it's a 10. Because we know how shocking that Aston Martin car has been, especially in the second half of the season. But can we just talk about Fernando Alonso's defense and that attack on the last lap? I mean, it just lets Perez go, and then on the last lap, never say never, never give up mentality from Fernando Alonso, and he does it into he overtakes Perez once again and holds on to third place. I mean, Perez had a fantastic race as well, don't get me wrong, but Fernando Alonso's race was better than Perez's, and he deserved that podium no matter what. So 9.5 out of 10 from me for Fernando Alonso. If he even got inside the top 10, actually maybe not top 10, top 8, where the points were given for the sprint, I'd have given him a 10 out of 10. But he just falls short purely on the Saturday. The Friday and the Sunday, perfect. The Saturday, a little bit more desired from that. So 9.5 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, that's understandable. On to fourth place, Sergio Perez. Now, I thought this was a much better performance from Sergio. I've given him an 8 out of 10. He qualified for the sprint in third and finished third. Qualified for the race in ninth and finished fourth. I think he was a little bit unlucky as well in the in qualifying, because he was one of those drivers who didn't go out for a second run, and he really slipped down the order because of it. And I think you just got to hold your hands up, like you said, for Fernando Alonso, because he contributed to a fantastic battle for that final podium position. It didn't work out for him, but this is a type of performance that Sergio Perez has needed all season, and it's what he's delivered here. So it's a good effort from him, but he does need to get podiums to keep that seat firmly within his grasp. So an 8 out of 10 for me.
I'm gonna one up you. I'll give Sergio a 9. I think we give this man a lot of slack, and I think at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, he delivered the goods, made a lot of good overtakes. Let's not forget he's made up 5 positions from his qualifying finish. If we're talking about his quali in actual essence, and not with all the penalties that were involved in there, but I don't think he might have gained one from George Russell. But if we're talking about purely qualifying, which he qualified P9, finished P4, making up 5 places, and then obviously getting a podium in the sprint, which is very helpful as well. I don't think he put a foot wrong, apart from qualifying, where we're obviously seeing him slipping down and on the brink of a top 10 once again. Usually expecting Perez, fastest car, P1, P2, and it's a 9th place start. it's not ideal, but the race made up for it with the moves he made. And with a fantastic spectacle him and Fernando Alonso put together. So it's definitely a 9 out of 10. It's a very, very much an important fourth place and an important third place in the sprint for Perez. But what he needs, I think, is at least 2 podiums, I think, at Las Vegas and in Abu Dhabi. To cement himself as the driver for Red Bull in 2024. Whether that contract is up in 2024, we won't know until the end of that season. But for next season, he just really needs to build on 2 podiums that hopefully he will get in Las Vegas and at Abu Dhabi. So for me, a 9 out of 10, very much a fantastic performance from Sergio, and one he needs to build on in the last 2 races of the season.
Moving on now to Lance Stroll, qualified for the sprint race in 17th and finished 12th, qualified in 3rd for the race and finished 5th. Now, you said about Sergio Perez, this guy that we give a lot of criticism to, and rightly so, for his performances this season. This is another man, Lance Stroll, and you've got to give him his credit where it's due. It was a good performance. He finished 5th, put it on the second row in qualifying. And, he wasn't far off Alonso's pace. He only finished 6 seconds behind him on track. Had a bit of a resurgence at the end. I think it was helped that Alonso probably lost a lot of time with his battle with Perez. But I've given him an 8 out of 10. A good performance, but it can't be to the same level as Alonso because he didn't get a podium. He got a good points finish, which takes him back above Pierre Gasly in the standings. Back up to 10th, but I don't think it can be any higher than that for Lance Stroll, simply because of the, maybe that little bit extra that Alonso had in the locker. Still, that is the highest grade I've actually given him this season. So, it just goes to show it was a good performance from him.
No, I completely agree with you on the Lance Stroll front. Once again, it's similar to Fernando Alonso in the sprint. Obviously P17 and P12, they were right behind each other in the sprint, and then in the race they weren't a million miles away from each other. So I think Lance Stroll, they desire a lot from him in the last 2 races. Hopefully he retires, fingers crossed. No, I'm joking. Whatever happens with Lance Stroll will happen. But the Sao Paulo Grand Prix kind of showed what driver he is, the risks he's willing to put, and especially qualifying 3rd. I mean, I don't think I was expecting Lance Stroll to be on the second row. I certainly was not expecting him to be on the second row. And ahead of Fernando Alonso, may I point out as well, in qualifying. Inevitably, he wasn't meant to be in the race, but he only lost out 2 places, finished P5, gained valuable points, and he's back up to P10 in the championship. And I think he needs to stay in the top 10, otherwise there's trouble for him looming at Aston Martin. Because if his teammate is up in 4th or 5th or 6th, wherever he finishes this season, a million miles above him, something that Lance Stroll needs to do is finish in the top 10. So it's an 8 out of 10 from me as well. It's a good performance, similarly to Sergio Perez, where he's kind of been on the ropes this past whole season compared to his teammate. And it's a performance where he showed a lot of grit and determination to grind out the points. So without a shadow of a doubt, it's a much improved Lance Stroll performance and an 8 out of 10.
On now to Carlos Sainz, qualified for the sprint in 9th and finished 8th, qualified for the race in 8th and finished 6th. It's a solid 7 out of 10 for me for Carlos Sainz. I don't think it was anything special, but again, it's another solid result. He brought in some good points for Ferrari, and crucially, he beat both Mercedes. So that gap continues to shrink, much to my horror. So yeah, it's going to be tight in that battle for P2. Mercedes still have a 20-point lead, but it is been shrinking, I think, every race for the last sort of 4 or 5 at least. Ferrari just closing in ever so slightly per race, and it's not nice to see one bit. But yeah, like I said, for Carlos Sainz, I think it would have been maybe an 8 or a 9 if he had beaten Lance Stroll to fifth, because I think he was battling him for a large portion of the race, but sort of fell away in that last stint. Ended up finishing about sort of 7 or 8 seconds behind him. And yeah, so a 7 out of 10, solid result. Nothing.
Yeah, it's another consistent Carlos Sainz performance. I mean, it was a shame that he only qualified P8 for the race and could only muster up a 6th place finish. If he finished ahead of Lance Stroll, we could be talking about an 8 out of 10 potentially, but a 7 out of 10 it is from me as well. I mean, it's another consistent Carlos Sainz performance. And you mentioned that the gap's been shrinking, but I'm pretty much certain it's been 20 points for the last 4 or 5 races. You end up, yeah, I think so. You end up pulling it back in the sprint, and then Ferrari claw a few points back in the main race. I'm pretty much certain. I can get receipts out, because I can remember I messaged you a few weeks back saying, "Oh, the gap is at 20 points." So it's at 20 points now again. And I mean, we are clawing back a little bit, but you always end up nipping it back in the sprint races. So it's one of them where I'm happy to see Carlos finish ahead of Lewis Hamilton in the main race. But I'm also hoping that we gain a few more points in Las Vegas and Abu Dhabi to get ourselves ahead in the Constructors' Championship and claim P2. But it's definitely a 7 out of 10. I don't think it's much more. I don't think it's much less. But another consistent and fine performance from Carlos Sainz. I know I can see you scrolling. You can find the receipts. I'll find the receipts. You just talk about the next segment.
I'm trying to find receipts, but I can't. I can't find any receipts. I'm pretty sure it's gone down from about like 40 about sort of 4 or 5 races ago. It's been going down by like 4 or 5 points each race weekend. But I could be wrong. Anyway, on to Pierre Gasly next. He qualified for the sprint and finished in 13th. Qualified in 13th as well for the race and finished 7th. And it's an 8 out of 10 from me. I think he's been performing to a very good standard over the last sort of few races. He's been outscoring his teammate consistently. And I think a lot of people maybe disregarded Gasly when he moved to Alpine and thought Ocon would almost wipe the floor with him. But that's not been the case. He's got about a 15-point lead over him in the Drivers' Championship. And he's doing a good job, Pierre Gasly. Another good finish, 7th, for an Alpine team where they're kind of in the middle of nowhere, really. They're quicker than the teams below them, but they have nowhere near the same speed on a week-to-week basis as the cars in front of them. So, but they're always there, in and around the points, making up those lower points positions. So an 8 out of 10 for me for Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, whilst you were talking, I've been still trying to find them receipts and I still can't find them. So clearly I've been chatting out of my arse because I can't find the receipts. So I'm going to end up putting the towel in and I'll say that you're correct and say the gap's shrinking and the thing is, you are boosting my optimism ahead of the last 2 races of the season. So I'll put my hands up. I'll say I'm sorry, and yeah, you're building excitement for this clash for whoever gets P2 in the Constructors' Championship. But on to Pierre Gasly. The sprint I don't think was fantastic. Qualifying as well, it was down the order because he got that penalty for impeding at the end of a pit lane, which we saw George Russell and his teammate Esteban Ocon do in qualifying. So he was down there. But still managed to finish P7, made up a lot of places, and it's an 8 out of 10 performance from me. It's once again steady progress for Pierre Gasly, and I think he needs it ahead of the last 2 races of the season, with the kind of head-to-head battle between him and Esteban Ocon going down to the wire. But yeah, it's another steady performance. It's similar to Carlos Sainz, where he's made kind of steady progress, and he's able to maintain it. Not like what happened in, I think it was, I want to say it was Mexico, where he was running up in the points, and then it just kind of faded away. Or it might have been US. I think it was Mexico though, where he was making steady progress and then just completely faded away. But yeah, solid points for Alpine. With Pierre Gasly, Ocon obviously got the 1 point as well. But it's a lot of confidence that Pierre Gasly can take into the last two races of the season, an unknown in Las Vegas, and then the finale in Abu Dhabi. So it's an 8 out of 10 from me. A fantastic performance from a Frenchman, and long may it continue ahead of the last two races of the season.
On now to Lewis Hamilton. I did just speak with my mic on mute. I know you noticed that. Now, this is a bit of a painful one. Qualified for the sprint in 5th and finished 7th. Qualified for the race in 5th and finished 8th. It was looking so good. I think he got up to 3rd, in fact, in the sprint, and his pace just fell away. And then he got up into 3rd as well in the main race and was fighting Norris on the restart for 2nd, lost out to him. Alonso nipped past. And then from there, it just got worse and worse and worse. I don't know what happened to that Mercedes this weekend on a track where 12 months ago they got a 1-2. I can see you talking to me there, but I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily the driver's fault. I think the car was just absolute dog water. So I'm going to give them a 5 out of 10. It's still a decent performance, but again, 8th place is shocking, but I think it's more down to the car than the driver, personally.
If the driver always blames his machinery, that's what Lewis Hamilton is probably doing. Is blaming that Mercedes, going, "Oh, the tire's gone." How many times does Lewis Hamilton talk about the tires being dead and then being one of the best drivers to kind of look after his tires? I will never know. He constantly blames his tires, and then his tires just turn out to be okay. He has a second wind, and he goes on to bigger and better things. But this performance, absolutely woeful for a Mercedes team fighting for second place in the championship. Look at the turn of tables. Yeah, I meant to say it in a manner like that. Because this performance is a 4 out of 10. It's okay. Some of it can probably go down to the machinery. And I think that Mercedes are kind of on the back foot, or have been on the back foot at Sao Paulo. I don't know how they'll be like in Las Vegas. But there was a sneaky stat that was released, showing the speed of Lewis Hamilton down the straight when Pierre Gasly overtook him, compared to Pierre Gasly's speed. Lewis Hamilton, I believe it was 293 kph. Pierre Gasly, 326. So whether the engine power is down in that Mercedes or what, something needs to be sorted ahead of the last two races of the season, because otherwise, because we have a very, very long straight in Las Vegas. And if that's the speed of the Mercedes, they are in to be a sitting duck. That's all I'm going to say. But yeah, this race just wasn't meant to be Lewis Hamilton's day, and it clearly showed. So a 4 out of 10 performance from me.
Moving on now to 9th place man Yuki Tsunoda, 6th in both the sprint qualifying and the sprint race. Qualified in 16th and then finished 9th. It's a 9 out of 10 for me. It's very almost a 10. If that qualifying on the Friday had been better, it probably would have been. But finished 6th in the sprint race is remarkable. He held off one of the Ferraris. I think it was Sainz for a large part. He overtook Hamilton when his pace just faded towards the end of the sprint race, and brung home some good points as AlphaTauri continue their march. Only 7 points now behind Williams. After, you think about how good a job Alex Albon has done and the fact they might end up finishing 8th behind AlphaTauri. And I think they probably would have been if Ricciardo didn't have that damage. But yeah, great performance from Tsunoda. He's done such a good job, and he's finally reaping the rewards of it because of this these upgrades that are apparent at in the car.
Yeah, 9 out of 10 from me as well for Yuki Tsunoda. To qualify 6th in the sprint and finish 6th ahead of a Ferrari and ahead of a Mercedes of Hamilton and Sainz, just extraordinary. And to come back in the race and to finish in points and make up so many places, also fantastic to see from Yuki Tsunoda. He's been struggling a lot. And we kind of saw what happened to Daniel Ricciardo. We were talking about Daniel Ricciardo kind of closing the gap in one race in Mexico. But Tsunoda's finally gained some valuable points and is able to reap the rewards of the upgrade. So a 9 out of 10, fantastic race. And hopefully the last 2 races of the season go down to the wire between Ricciardo and Tsunoda, similarly to Gasly and Ocon. In the inter-team battles. So yeah, a 9 out of 10 from me. It's a fantastic display from Yuki Tsunoda in Sao Paulo.
And the final points finisher on Sunday's race is Esteban Ocon. He qualified for the sprint in 16th and finished 14th. Qualified for the race in 12th and finished 10th. 7 out of 10 from me. You know, he got into the points, but he was not on the same level as his teammate, despite actually the fact that he qualified ahead of him. He finished quite a way behind him in the end, so it's got to be lower than Gasly's 8 out of 10 for me. So that's why I've given him a 7.
You say it's got to be lower than Gasly, and I agree. But I'm giving him a 6 out of 10. I think it was quite average from Ocon. It wasn't his best race by a long stretch. And I think he was one of the drivers that obviously tried the alternate strategy. And try to make it stick. But I mean, he got it into the points, but just wasn't able to reap the rewards of the fresh softs that he adds on. So yeah, 6 out of 10. It was average. It wasn't anything much more than that. So yeah, 6 out of 10.
And now on to those that finished outside the points on Sunday. Logan Sargent up first. Qualified for the sprint in 20th and finished 20th. Qualified for the race in 19th and finished 11th. Now, I'm not sure what to make of this because I think that maybe it's slightly inflated by the fact that only 14 cars finished the race. But I've given Sargent a 6 out of 10. He only finished about 11, 12 seconds off of the points. So it's a decent showing. Up until that point, he'd been woeful. But I think in the race, he put a good performance. And I think that's got to be it's got to have a slightly higher weighting than the sprint and qualifying, personally. So I've given him a 6 out of 10. Shows a better pace. Obviously, he got his first points a couple of races ago, but needs to really capitalize on that momentum and continue to put in these performances to really help his effort in maintaining that seat.
Yeah, a driver that is yet to be confirmed for 2024. The only driver that is yet to be confirmed for 2024, Logan Sargent. Yeah, I'd agree with you. I'd also give Logan Sargent a 6 out of 10, but I think his race finish is highly inflated by the 6 retirees that we had in the race. But I mean, he did finish ahead of Hulkenberg. I mean, we could have had 8 retirees. With Ricciardo and Piastri, we should basically class them as retirees because they were finished just under a lap down. I believe it was like 40 seconds back from Hulkenberg. But yeah, it was an okay race from Logan Sargent. I won't say it was much more than that. Hulkenberg obviously had his own troubles. Ricciardo and Piastri had their own troubles. So yeah, it was kind of inflated. He finished as technically the last of the capable drivers and the capable cars that did not receive any damage or any whack on that lap one. So yeah, 6 out of 10. I don't think I could give him much more than that though. Dear.
On now to the Nico Hulkenberg. He qualified for the sprint in 12th and finished 18th. Qualified for the race in 11th and finished 12th. It's a 6 out of 10 for me. he got very unlucky at the start because I don't think he could really do much. He just got sandwiched between his teammate and Albon. I'm not sure whether that caused any damage for him. I'm sure it would have, but he managed to continue and essentially finished last on the road because I don't think you can really count Ricciardo and Piastri. But yeah, it's 6 out of 10. Not too good a weekend, but how many times do we have to say it? That Haas is absolutely woeful. It's shocking. So not a good car. And yeah, 6 out of 10.
I think you say it more or less every single episode about that Haas being absolutely woeful. But I've given him a 5 out of 10. Obviously, the collision with, I believe it was Alex Albon, wasn't his fault. Alex Albon and Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg were all involved, but Nico kind of came out a little bit more unscathed than his teammate. And he essentially finished last on the road, discounting Ricciardo and Piastri, who were essentially a lap down until they unlapped themselves by overtaking Nico Hulkenberg. So yeah, I don't think I can really add more. It was unlucky at the start to be in that collision. But that sprint was just woeful. Qualifying 12th and just going backwards and finishing 18th. I believe ahead of only Bottas and Sargent. So yeah, it wasn't one of the better weekends for Haas, especially after the highs they had last season of Kevin Magnussen qualifying on pole position. This season was just a damper on their spirits. So yeah, 5 out of 10 wasn't brilliant.
Now on to Daniel Ricciardo, who qualified for the sprint in 8th and finished 9th, qualified for the race in 17th and finished 13th. Now, I just want to say something. How, after the red flag, were Ricciardo and Piastri a lap down? I get it in the sense that they were a lap down because they came back out and like almost de-retired. They came back into the race. But why is it at the red flag that the FIA didn't do anything to put them back onto the lead lap? They're already starting right at the back. But this happens every other time. Those drivers that are like a lap down always go back onto the lead lap. It doesn't make any sense. So from that point, their race was over. They were counting on a safety car or something where they could actually unlap themselves again, which didn't come. But I don't understand what the FIA are doing there because there was almost no point those two running. However, I will say that actually Daniel Ricciardo had really good pace and actually saw he was matching the pace of the top 5 whilst he was in clean air during the race. So it's a good performance from him anyway. So it's 7 out of 10 for me because he was unlucky in the sprint as well not to get any points. So I think it's a solid weekend for Ricciardo. The FIA blunder has really cost him a chance of going for some points, but it is what it is. On to the next race for Daniel Ricciardo.
There we go. Ethan's back at it, blaming the FIA for virtually everything. It's surely, when we have the season finale, like we round off our fantastic predictions and we look at the best moments we've had. Brad, the editor, realistically needs to find every single clip and we should have an awards evening where Ethan blames the FIA for at least one thing or another. And I think that would be a fun thing to do. But on Daniel Ricciardo's topic, unlucky not to get points in the sprint, and that FIA blunder, shall we call it, really cost him in the race. But yeah, he drove solidly. Obviously, he could have just coasted around and retired the car after that damage, but he didn't. He fought valiantly to unlap himself. I know it didn't get him anywhere, but it's a 6 out of 10 from me. It was a decent weekend, but obviously that incident on lap 1 didn't help him at all. So 6 out of 10.
And same story really with Oscar Piastri. He qualified in 10th for the sprint and finished 10th. He qualified 10th as well in the race and finished 14th. Now it's slightly lower for me. I've given Oscar Piastri a 6 out of 10 because I feel like, particularly for the sprint and for qualifying, I think he should be maybe doing a bit of a better job. I think the performance has kind of slumped a little bit since Qatar, where he had that excellent weekend. Um, I feel like he definitely should be getting points in that sprint race and qualifying higher up, so he's not in a position where he's getting that damage in the first place. And then it's probably a completely different race, but he's being out qualified by, both Aston Martins, both Ferraris, I think as well. I can't remember who else, but yeah, I think he needs to be putting that car higher in qualifying to avoid all of this happening. Personally, so a 6 out of 10, not bad, but yeah, it's not the best performance either.
I've settled with the same rating for the two Aussies. So I've given Oscar Piastri also a 6 out of 10. I think, yeah, like you mentioned, I'm not gonna say I watched the sprint shootout and the sprint in the ins and outs of it because I was busy doing other things. But in the race especially, I agree with you that he should be qualifying a little bit higher up. But then again, I don't think the two McLarens had an exceptional qualifying on a Friday at all. So whether he could have qualified a little bit higher up, I don't know. I think the two Aston Martins had exceptional qualifyings, and obviously Oscar Piastri was out qualified by George Russell initially, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, etc. He obviously was the last person in Q3, and he made the most of it. But I don't think the McLarens had an exceptional qualifying by a long stretch, and I think the weather conditions played a massive part in that happening. So it's a 6 out of 10. It's an average performance, and an average performance where Oscar Piastri realistically should be doing a lot more, because in sprint weekends in the past we've seen him get a podium and even a race victory. So the last one of the season wasn't meant to be for him, and I think the overall weekend in Sao Paulo wasn't meant to be. So a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, on now to the DNF, the retirees for the race. George Russell up first, qualified for the sprint in fourth and finished fourth, qualified for the race in sixth and did not finish. I've given him the exact same rating as the game for Lewis Hamilton. I think because Russell was quicker and finished ahead of him in the sprint. Their qualifying for the race was fairly similar. They were on the third row together, and then they had similar pace. I think Russell's pace slightly dropped off just before he retired, so he dropped further down the order. But awful weekend for Mercedes. I just give them both 5 because I don't think it's completely their fault. But they still didn't cover themselves in glory. So a 5 out of 10.
I'll give them both 4s. I'm happy with that. I'm extremely happy with that. Actually, I won't say I'm extremely happy with that, because George Russell is. I wouldn't go as far on record to say that he struggled, but he's not been at his best. I think that's the phrase that I'm going to use. He's not been at his best this season, and I don't know whether I said it last episode. I don't know whether he's had it ingrained in his head where, oh, I've beaten Lewis Hamilton one season, I don't need to do it again, sort of mentality about it. But I think the right phrase to put it into perspective, I just don't think he's been at the races this season. I just think there's a bit of mentality switch, and I'm not going to say that he's a bit big-headed after what happened last season with him beating Lewis Hamilton. But I think his ego was a little bit inflated after last season. And seeing what Lewis Hamilton did this season, seeing what Lewis Hamilton has done to him this season, is kind of put him back down to earth. And I'm hoping that 2024 season, they're level and they're battling one another. But yeah, George Russell, I mean, Sprint was good. He gained valuable points in the sprint. Wasn't too far away from the podium. And then in the main race, it just kind of unraveled, and he just was going backwards and backwards and backwards. So, yeah, a 4 out of 10. It's not a fantastic performance by a long stretch for George Russell, and I think Mercedes on a whole struggled in Sao Paulo. So, 4 out of 10 for both Mercedes, something that they need to work on ahead of the last two races of the season. That's for sure.
To be fair, I'll go as far as saying George Russell's not been at the races this season. I think, well, he's only had one podium this season. In the races, Hamilton is beating him 14-6. And, he is 8th in the Drivers' Championship, 70 points behind Lewis Hamilton. And, he's 14 points behind Leclerc and about 35 behind Sainz. So if Mercedes lose P2 in the constructors, it's because of his performances. How many times have we spoken about the difference between Verstappen and Perez or Alonso and Stroll? I'd argue that that's sort of becoming apparent between Hamilton and Russell, particularly this season. And I think part of that is because the level and the standard to which Lewis Hamilton has been operating at, but also Russell's not been good enough, I don't think, this season. He's, like I said, he's got one podium this season, back in Spain. And he's putting in decent performances. He's finishing around 5th or 6th. But when your teammate is finishing in the top 4 every single race, it feels like, well, apart from this weekend, obviously, is that good enough? So I'll just have a look at our rankings. Russell has not got a 10 out of 10 this season. And since the summer break, he's only got 1-9, which was his Qatar performance, where he came back through the field. So I don't know. I don't think it's particularly good enough this season so far from Russell. And I think next season he really needs to step it up again. Otherwise, Mercedes will be questioning whether, when Hamilton retires, is this the correct man to lead them forward and become that number one driver. Anyway, on now to Valtteri Bottas, and we're going to do Bottas and Zhou at the same time, or I am anyway. So Bottas, sprint qualifying 14th and sprint race 19th, qualified at 18th and did not finish, while Zhou qualified for the sprint in 18th and finished 17th, qualified 20th in the race and did not finish. They both retired with the same problems. I think it was an overheating issue on their engine, which caused them both to retire. But again, neither one of them has really done too much this weekend. They didn't put in the best performances, either of them, and I think that this is a 4 out of 10 for both of them. I'm not gonna separate the two, because I feel like they were both as on the same level as each other, and it does make you wonder. They had that good points finish a few races ago, but is this turning into another Giovinazzi and Raikkonen situation where you've got the older driver who's, retiring within the next couple of seasons and maybe he's taking their foot off the pedal, and the young, promising driver can't really step up to the plate and assert themselves as the dominant driver in the team? And it's flip-flopping a bit between the two of them, which one's going to be ahead, but neither one of them are really doing anything of note in the drivers' championship. They've got a combined 16 points this season, and they've only finished in the points 7 times. So not great for them. So 4 out of 10 for me for both of
them. If I've given the two Mercedes guys 4 out of 10, I don't think I can give the two Alfa Romeo guys more than that. So that's why I'm giving them 3 out of 10s for this weekend. Did they have new engines in? New gearboxes? No. Yeah, the old debate about Alfa Romeo having new gearboxes, and I think that's what they needed, because their engine overheated and it could have gone kaput, but it didn't. They pulled them in and they retired. So both of them are 3 out of 10. They were as bad as each other. Obviously, finishing 19th and 17th in the sprint, and then qualifying was poor as well. Pretty much back row for the two of them, yeah, which just wasn't the best weekend, and both 3 out of 10s, both were as bad as each other. And probably the worst on the grid this weekend. So 3 out of 10s for the pair in Alfa Romeo.
On now to another driver who I don't think is going to be getting a high grade. Kevin Magnussen qualified for sprint 11th and finished 16th. Qualified 14th, did not finish. A first lap retirement for K-Mag. Again, 4 out of 10. He was well beaten by his teammate all weekend. And yeah, it's not a very good performance from him. And it does make you wonder, is the reason Haas haven't looked to replace K-Mag for next season, even though we both think he's not done a very good job compared to his teammate? Is it because they're lining up Oliver Behrman for 2025 to step into that seat? He obviously looked quite promising in that practice session. I think it was at Mexico even. And is he being lined up for that role? Obviously, they got that linked with Ferrari, and he's a Ferrari junior. I just think maybe that that's the natural step for Haas.
And I'm not confirmed. Is that a conspiracy theory I hear from Ethan Evans? Ha ha ha. Ethan might be the new Sherlock Holmes. I can't lie, you do a good job for Sherlock Holmes, and I think you might be onto a winner here, because I think I'm inclined to agree regarding that, because it's just a natural way of thinking. Does Nico Hulkenberg continue after 2024? K-Mag, I don't think will. I think they'll be looking to replace him at the end of next season. And I think they've only penned a 1-year deal for the pair anyway, until 2024, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, you say that K-Mag was beaten by Nico Hulkenberg all weekend. The sprint would like to disagree with you, because Hulkenberg finished 18th and Kevin Magnussen finished 16th. So that's already you've already stung yourself there, mate. Yeah, you've already screwed up there, pal. But it is a 4 out of 10 performance nonetheless this weekend. I mean, Hulkenberg was fortunate to continue. Magnussen just collateral damage with Alex Albon and ended his race. So ultimately, it was a 4 out of 10. And I'm going to say it once again. I'm going to say Ethan's famous quote once again. Haas are well and truly woeful, truly woeful. 4 out of 10.
On now to what I think might be a bit of a sore topic for you, Charles Leclerc. He qualified up in second, qualified for the sprint race in 7th and finished 5th. Qualified in 2nd and did not start. It's a 6 out of 10 for me. I can't give him as high as Sainz as a 7, but the retirement was not his fault at all. But it is just typical Charles Leclerc luck that he doesn't even start the race. So I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. But yeah, maybe because he did put it on the front row and it was looking promising. I think he would have been on for a podium possibly. He probably would have finished 3rd, I think. I don't think he would have had the pace as Norris or Verstappen. But I think he would have been thereabouts for that podium position with Alonso and Perez had he not retired. So it's a disappointing one from his perspective. From my perspective, I am quite glad about it, because if he had got a podium, that gap to Mercedes would be 5 points. So I am very happy that he was unable to take part due to that hydraulics failure. But a 6 out of 10 from me.
Actually, I don't think you would have been correct, because I think the gap would be a bit more. Sainz would have obviously finished 7th. So I think it would have been about 7 or 8 points.
7 points then, because if Sainz gets 2 less points.
Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, still, the gap would have shrunken completely down to single digits, and it would have been game on. I mean, it still is game on. Don't get me wrong, but it is a little bit of squeaky bum time for Ferrari. Not gonna lie, I was hoping we'd talk about Alex Albon before we talked about Charles Leclerc because he was the last DNF. But you've completely switched it on me, and we're talking about Charles Leclerc first. Yeah, it is a sore subject. But in this case, not in the case of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell talking about the machinery. In this case, it was actually the machinery that faltered on Charles Leclerc, and once again, we've got a nice little photo and clip of Charles Leclerc of a barrier, which we're synonymous of seeing in the last couple of seasons. The one little quote that comes into my head goes, "I am stupid." But in this case, I'd say the car is stupid because it completely just shut off on him, and the power steering went, and he couldn't reboot it up again, and he just went into the barrier. But it's a 6 out of 10 nonetheless. A front row start, a P5 in a sprint. It was looking like a promising weekend, but the car just failed on him, and he couldn't participate in the race whatsoever. So yeah, 6 out of 10. Can't be more than that. And it's a sore one for Ferrari.
You can blame the F1 website for that because it actually showed that Leclerc above Albon on their like the finishing order for the.
Yeah, but how does that make sense, Ferrari?
It doesn't make sense,
Ferrari,
no, but I'm just going by
website,
that.
How does that make sense?
It doesn't make any sense. No, I agree with you, but that's what I've gone off, and it had Leclerc above Albon in that order for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, like you said, last but not least, Alex Albon. Not the best weekend, I don't think, for Alex Albon. He qualified for the sprint in 19th and finished 15th. Qualified in 15th and did not finish. Again, I think it was an issue with their having a lap deleted for Alex Albon, which is why he was so low down in Q2. But it's a 4 out of 10 for me. Not a very good performance. It's probably his worst of the season, I'd say, or certainly one of them, for what has been an excellent season from Alex Albon. You've got to hand it to him for everything he's done this season, but this performance wasn't to that same level. And yeah, it's a 4 out of 10 from me.
Yeah. You can...
for me, exactly.
Just casually making an appearance whilst we're recording. It's calm. Brad can edit this out the podcast, so it's calm. But yeah, the final driver that we get to talk about, Alex Albon, sprint shootout 19th, sprint 15th. Okay, made up places, but then that first lap collision with Kevin Magnussen and a P15 start is not what Alex Albon would have desired. It's a 4 out of 10. I don't think I could give it more than that. It's probably one of the worst weekends that Alex Albon would have hoped for, and one of the worst weekends that he's had in a long time. That Williams team is based around him, and they were probably hoping that he'd be able to guide them to some points in Sao Paulo. But it wasn't meant to be. It didn't happen. And it unfortunately ended in a lap one incident with Alex Albon, and he had to retire from a race. So it's a 4 out of 10. And I think that with Williams' straight line speed ahead of Las Vegas, I think they'll be looking to capitalize on that as much as possible. So hopefully Alex Albon will stay out of trouble in this next race coming up. And hopefully Williams have a good points haul. But for this one, it's a 4 out of 10.
And that sums up all of our 1 to 10 driver rankings for the 2023 Sao Paulo Grand Prix. 2 races to go this season, and there's still plenty to fight for up and down the grid. Thank you all for listening to this episode of On The Grid Podcast. We will see you next week when we will be reviewing our predictions from this weekend's Grand Prix and looking ahead to the first ever Las Vegas Grand Prix. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.